Good morning, everyone. It's 8:40. Welcome back to CW Iowa Live. Look who is here, folks. It is Michael Jankins, a bankruptcy attorney, going to be answering some questions here. And I think that's where we're going to start, Michael, is because we talk about bankruptcy with you on the program all the time. And just curious, when people hear the messages that you share with them on the program, they give you a call and they ask you different questions to get the conversation started. Where do those conversations usually start?
Well, they have... Excuse me, they have a lot of questions they like to ask, sometimes too many, but we...
But it's better to ask questions than just to sit there and assume.
Sure, and we're happy to try to answer questions on the phone because then those people tend to come in if you're willing to spend a little bit of time with them. So the questions are usually pretty good questions, and one of the big ones that they'll ask me is, I've got a lot of financial trouble, I'm really experiencing a lot of debt. Can you tell me what bankruptcy does? I hear about it, but I don't really know what would it do for me.
What's the biggest misconception when it comes to bankruptcy?
Well, I think some people have a misconception that if you file, you hear you can keep your house, and I think some people think you get to keep it and not pay for it, which unfortunately isn't accurate, and the same would be true with a car. They hear, well, I hear you can keep your car, and that's true as long as you keep paying for it if you have a debt against it. So that's kind of a misconception.
Okay, so what would you tell these people when they ask you? They say, "Listen, I think I'm in some financial constraints here." What is bankruptcy? What do you tell them?
What I generally tell them, because they're having financial problems, that's what they let off with.
Right.
So we pretty much tell them, look, bankruptcy is a legal tool that for many people you can use it to eliminate your unsecured debt. Now I go on to explain what that means because a lot of people, I use that term and I might as well be talking Chinese, they don't know what's unsecured debt. So we tell them, well, the kind of debt that it generally gets rid of is your medical bills, your credit cards, bank loans that may be unsecured, lines of credit that aren't connected to your home as a mortgage, old utility bills, payday loans, those types of things. And so then you hear a big sigh of relief on the other end of the phone going, oh, that sounds great, because that's what I've got. So we just tell them that it gets rid of those. You get a fresh start, and you don't ever have to worry about those again. So that's a pretty big question. And
now there's different kinds of bankruptcy. Was Chapter 13 the most common that you would be requested?
Chapter 7 actually is the most common. That's the kind that gets rid of the debts. Okay. And that leads to the next one I've got down here. Some people call me up because Chapter 13 isn't what I would call the common form of bankruptcy. And
but that's the one people hear about the most. They always hear about Chapter 13, Chapter 13.
Oh, I don't know. I think they hear mostly about, I don't know that they really necessarily hear about any chapter. They kind of just hear bankruptcy. Okay. And I mean, Chapter 7 is the one that is what people, understand bankruptcy to be. But some people hear this Chapter 13 and they have a misconception about it because, so people will call me up and they'll go, hey, I need to file Chapter 13. And for many people, that's unusual for them to ask me about that specific bankruptcy because either they've been reading about it someplace or they just got a notion in their head about this Chapter 13, and I ask them why. I mean, why do you want that kind? Because normally people want out from their debt, not to pay them in a Chapter 13, which is what it is. And so they go, well, I want to keep my house and I want to keep my car. And I go, okay, is that the only reason? And yeah. Well, you don't have to do Chapter 13. I say, if you do that, that's a payment program we set up in the court where we consolidate all your unsecured debt like your credit cards and your medical bills, and you'll pay on them for the next 5 years. I go, oh, I don't want that. So I said, no, in Chapter 7 bankruptcy, you can keep your car, and as long as you have a loan, you're going to keep paying on it. You can keep your house as long as you just keep the mortgage. And again, they're real happy. Oh, that's exactly what I want. So it's a misconception, really, as to the different type of chapters.
Okay, good to know.
And so then we get some people calling and they'll want to know, hey, can I get rid of my medical bills? And I'm not really sure why anybody has ever gotten the notion that they can't get rid of their medical bills in bankruptcy. I mean, that's one of the bigger reasons people end up needing to file bankruptcy. And it always has been. It's been a real...
What, do they think medical bills are exempt for some reason?
I'm not really sure. I mean, if anything, I would think people would have been calling sometimes going, hey, can I get rid of credit card bills? Because the law changed like 10, 11 years ago, and that was kind of a big focus to have to pay part of that back. But So now we say, yeah, you can get rid of your medical bills. How much you got? Oh, $50,000. And so, yeah, I mean, bankruptcy was meant for somebody.
What's the biggest medical bill that you had dismissed?
Well, it's usually an accumulation of many, many bills, pages and pages. But I mean, I've seen 200,000 worth of medical debt. These days, it's not that hard to get there.
True.
You don't have insurance.
But like you said, that's what bankruptcy was kind of made for, is people can't pay these major debts.
Catastrophic event.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I mean, we tell them, yep, and that's an easy answer. Then sometimes people call up and say, hey, I've got a lot of judgments against me. They've taken me to court. My wages are being garnished, and that's why they're calling me. Can I get rid of these if I take bankruptcy, or is it too late if it's already gone to judgment? And no, I mean, there's not any time period where all of a sudden you can't take bankruptcy on these type of debts. So even if the court's made a determination and the judge signed the judgment, you can still get rid of those. We've got people that are filing that the judgments have been sitting around for 5, 6, 7 years, and they're gone.
Really? Wow.
So those are kind of nice to know.
So it's never too late.
Never too late to file on a debt.
Okay.
Sometimes it's too late for the debt to come after the person. They got a thing called a statute of limitations.
Right.
And so like on credit cards and the things, they got 10 years to sue you in court from the date of last payment. Otherwise, they can't come after you anymore. Or I should say they're not supposed to.
Okay.
And on medical bills, it's 5 years from the date of last payment. If they just pretty much let it lie in the weeds and don't do anything, they lose their rights to collect after a certain period of time.
All right, now what about the situation if it arises where you file bankruptcy? How would that affect your spouse?
Well, the impact of one spouse filing bankruptcy doesn't really directly have any impact on another spouse if that person didn't file. Now, sometimes both spouses should have filed. They don't have to. We get many people that'll call and say, I need to file bankruptcy, but my husband refuses or doesn't want to or doesn't need to because he doesn't have any debt. And so there's no requirement that just because one spouse files that the other spouse has to go along for the ride. We have people that are coming from second marriages and they have different lives before they got together, and one may have had a very strong financial life where they don't use credit cards, and the other one may not have been in such a great situation and has all types of debt that they came into the marriage with. So yeah, I mean, it's not an uncommon situation where we only file for one spouse. Now you got to be careful because some people have the misnomer that if you're on a debt together, like a loan or some other type of debt, and the one spouse files, well, they're in the clear. Yeah. Well, they're not. I mean, they didn't file bankruptcy. So if bankruptcy, worked to get rid of one person's debt, that doesn't mean the other person who didn't come along is out of it too. They're not. So you have to be really careful. And sometimes one spouse just can't stomach the idea and bring themselves to filing. And we try to convince them and urge them to, really reconsider because they should. And it's not uncommon that 2, 3 years later, they'll end up coming back to me going, I wished I would have done it when you told me to. And so I say, well, I'll make 2 fees on it when it wasn't necessary. So I try to urge them to file together if it's appropriate.
But you're able to give that kind of advice if people come to you, call, set up a meeting, and you can kind of look at what's in front of them and give them the advice that they need.
Yeah, we like to look at the whole picture and advise them, what's best for each person.
What is the typical sit-down, the first sit-down usually take time-wise?
About an hour on average, sometimes longer, sometimes maybe 45 minutes, but on average an hour.
You've been talking about questions that people typically ask you. Really quickly, what would you be asking the person on the other line of the phone so that they're prepared when they do call you up?
Well, some of the important things I ask is I like to know what their incomes are because incomes are determinative of whether you can have a Chapter 7 bankruptcy or not.
Okay.
I ask them generally if they know how much debt they've got so that it's an appropriate amount of debt to even be discussing this and what type of debt it is, whether it's credit cards, medical bills, and to make sure it's not a person that we get calls from also where they say, I've got $50,000 of student loans, but nothing else. Well, there's nothing we can do with student loans in bankruptcy, so there's really nothing for me I can help them with. So we like to know that too. We don't like to slot an appointment, have them come in, and then we're there for 5 minutes and go, sorry, can't do nothing for you. It's all student loans.
Yeah, so lay that out ahead of time.
So we like to screen it a little bit, so it's usually real beneficial actually to talk to the people and know what we're going to be dealing with.
But when you sit down with somebody and you talk to them and you walk them through some of these things, you will tell them whether or not it is worth their while to go through with it.
Always.
Okay.
Or sometimes on the phone I'll tell them it's not worthwhile for them to do it and let them know why, and then they've gotten the information they need, and I give them options of what they could do, and then we have an appointment for somebody that's really needing the time.
There you go. And we continue to give you information right here with Attorney Jankins right here on CW Iowa Live, so make sure you keep tuning in or give this man a call. If you have questions that we weren't able to answer for you today, call his office and he'd be glad to help.
There you go. And visit him online too and get all the information you're looking for. Wonderful. Michael, thank you very much. Good to see you, my friend. It is 8:51 right now, and we will be right back. You are watching CW Iowa Live in West Des Moines.